Hello, welcome to another edition of Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher. Of course, we have Sam Finkel with us to go inside the data for your Eagles questions. This is another mailbag. We're really excited about the number of questions, Sam, we've been getting for your mailbags that we've been doing. And to start off the show, I just want everybody to know, please continue to send your questions, direct them to Sam at insidethebirds@gmail.com. And B, we're getting so many questions, and obviously some of the questions involve a lot of research and Sam going into the book. So if we haven't gotten to your question yet, it doesn't mean we're not going to get to it. It just means maybe take Sam a few extra days to put the numbers together, and very likely we'll get to it as we get through this summer and continue to do these mailbags. And of course, we want to shout out Chris W. He's been very patient. He's asked a really good question. Sam, you're just waiting on what? Some specific NFC Championship data to be able to answer this question?
Yeah, for some reason, NFL Pro, Next Gen Stats, they don't have the NFC Championship, which is kind of insane.
That is.
I built a model to already answer his question was about the D-line, and I went to a big deep dive on it. But I just don't want to put those numbers out there without it being the most accurate version of them.
That's right. We're thorough here on Inside the Data. So, Chris, it's under construction, as they say. We'll get to it, and we appreciate the question. So, and remember, the theme of Inside the Data, it's not just to rely on one specific metric when we're trying to come up with data-based answers to your question. Sam, you've done an excellent job of and we'll continue to do this in this pod, making sure everybody understands that data is only half the story. There's a lot of context, especially in football, right? That would maybe change the different or adds to the conversation. And two, that there's different forms of data and analytics and numbers that tell different stories.
Yeah, I think especially today with the questions we have, that you'll see that theme appear.
Right. So let's start it off with Randy. Question from Randy S. And it's a fantastic question. His question is, what's the best metric for measuring quarterback success? And he mentions that he's a huge fan of Peyton Manning, but looking at some of the data, it looks like other quarterbacks could have had the same or even better success if they had the same weapons and the same defense. And, he uses that as to say it's a similar position that he tries to justify Jalen Hurts' place in the history of top QBs with amazing win and loss records, but that the stats don't always support the legacy. So that's a big monster of a question that really begins with, Sam, what are the best metrics involved for quarterback success?
Yeah, sure. So I think to answer his question, especially for the quarterback position, the best metric that exists doesn't, right? There is no great capture of quarterback success.
Right.
There's too much volatility based on situation, play calling, and supporting cast. Therefore, you have to do some sort of contextual analysis, and that's the best way to analyze a quarterback. You need multiple different statistics while also, you use that quantitative data, but you also qualify it. Use qualitative data and analysis in order to ensure you capture the best success. But I did do a study on quarterbacks, and sometimes I publish studies independently. And this is one of the ones on Twitter that I think would be really salient for this analysis. So I think a good way to start this is to share some of the findings from that study and the visualization from the study. So we can do that really quick.
Sure. All right. For those watching on YouTube, we now have one of Sam's studies and graphs up on the screen. If not, and for those who are listening on the podcast version, we'll do our best to describe it. So, Sam, why don't you just lay out the parameters here of this chart that we're looking at?
Yeah, so this is just a chart that shows the EPA per dropback and also completion percentage over expectation. And so what it does is, and the red line shows the league average. And this is just 1 year. The first chart's just 1 year. It's just the 2024-2025 season. And really, the ones in the top right corner had a higher, completion percentage over expected than average, and they had a higher EPA, expected points added per dropback. And the top left, They had a higher EPA per dropback, but not completion percentage over expected. Obviously, like in most of my charts, you don't want to be in that bottom left, and because you're low in both.
Yeah, I like how you labeled it the holding team back set quadrant of the chart.
Absolutely. And then in the bottom right, these quarterbacks made tougher than average throws, but didn't translate to efficiency. So as you can see,
can you explain that real quick? Why a quarterback who makes a tougher than average throw would not translate to efficiency? What are the variables involved there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot of variables involved in these kind of determinations, but basically what that would mean is that they're playmakers, their play calling, a lot of things would kind of leave them to struggle a little bit. You know, they are held back by factors that are on the team that they really can't control. So they're making really tough throws, but it's not translating to points. It's not translating to scores, and a lot of that comes down to like what surrounds them, and that's kind of a good way to contextualize in this like specific example. So
yeah, no, great. I mean, I'm seeing Kirk Cousins in that quadrant and Geno Smith, two guys who I think are fairly accurate quarterbacks who do make really good tight window throws, but also did not put a whole lot of points on the board for their respective teams that year. And again, that's not all their fault, but they're the quarterback, so they kind of get that. Certainly Kirk Cousins got the blame for it, and then Geno's, obviously the Seahawks decided to go in a different direction with Geno Smith. So I think that illustrates your point.
Yeah. So the way I kind of labeled it, like you said, in the top right, that's a game changer because they added value and consistently made the tough throws. Top left, I think I should just say what they're titled. It was the benefited by scheme. So these quarterbacks added value, but their throws were less difficult, suggesting good play design, supporting cast, and or decision making.
Right.
Which,
and
again, they shouldn't be punished for good decision making, but that is part of this process. And then obviously holding team back and held back. So I think that's a good way to kind of, visualize where quarterback play is right now in the league and where it was last year. And as you can see in the top right, but a little bit lower, you can see Jalen Hurts comfortably far on that right side. So
yeah, so obviously his completion percentage over expected is about as good as it can get, and I think the best among all of these quarterbacks. That if I'm reading this correctly,
yes.
All right, and as far as his expected points added per drop back, which is the EPA per drop back, he only is topped by Goff, Lamar, Josh Allen, and Tua, Tua's an excellent thrower of the football when he throws it. But you could argue. I'm actually surprised he's not on the other quadrant where benefited by scheme, because that's such a highly schemed offense.
I mean, he's right there.
He's close. He's really close
he's
for
right
those watching. Yeah, he's really close to that line. So. It's an interesting cluster here in the upper right quadrant that includes Brock Purdy and Baker Mayfield, Herbert, Derek Carr, Kyler Murray, Sam Darnold. But clearly the two names that really jump out in this upper right quadrant, Sam, are Jalen Hurts for his expected completion percentage over expected, and then Jared Goff is probably in the spot where everybody wants to be, where he's, not the number one guy in completion percentage over expected, but certainly right up there with everybody else in expected points added, which is the whole point of like playing football, right? Scoring points when you're the quarterback. I mean, he almost stands alone a little bit in this upper right quadrant because they had such a great year last year.
Absolutely. And I think when we go to the second chart, you can see somebody asked me in the comments about, how does it look if you add, a little bit more years into it. And so this is a 3-year average. And you can kind of, it's a lot of data on there. So we can just kind of, big picture it.
Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting. And I think you can kind of see where the league is at. And again, with the league,
I'm sorry, I just now realized it's not that you have 3-year averages for each player. You have each player's last 3 years individually. So you have Hurts appearing a couple of different times here. Go ahead.
Yep. But the red line is the 3-year average.
Right.
So it's just compared to that. And as you can see, I mean, it's somewhat similar, but it shifted over a little bit too. So if you saw above, you would be shocked. Josh Allen and Lamar were in the benefited by scheme before, but they're now with the 3-year average in the game changers, which they were game changers for their respective teams.
Right. I like this chart. I like having not just 1 year, but 3 full years. I mean, we've already discussed Jalen Hurts' 2024, where he is far ahead on the right side in the upper right quadrant, especially because of his completion percentage. But then when you look at his 2022 and 23, he's still in the upper right quadrant for 22. I'm looking for him on 23. Give me some help here. Oh, right here.
Yep.
Right here. Okay. So when you look at the 3-year average, 2 of the 3 years, he's still in the upper right quadrant, Sam, right? But it's a deep pool of players. So I may not help answer the question so much as far as like, where is his placement? There's a bunch of good quarterbacks, individual seasons or 2 or even 3, right? If you call Patrick Mahomes up in this upper right quadrant.
Sure. And Mahomes shifted over to, benefited by scheme too. I mean, that's just because of the way the play style went, and play calling. So I think, yes, there's a lot of quarterbacks there. And I think the way that you measure it, I had another table called a mobility matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And what that did is I just measured, who stayed, who remained, and it kind of gives a better indication of like, is this a good chart for success?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does a pretty good job of capturing success in a season. But again, it's just a snapshot, right? It's a tool to evaluate quarterback performance in a single season, and the trend tracker contextualizes it. So that's where we talk about with context, right? You have to look at you see their placement here. I think this is a good tool, but you have to say, why are they there? And I think if you have good reasoning for why they're there, and they appear there consistently each year, that's a good indication of success.
Right. Yeah. Consistency. It's the hallmark of very good quarterbacks. One of the names that jumps out at me here in the upper right quadrant at least twice and maybe 3 times. And obviously 2023, he's up there with anybody is Brock Purdy. Because I do think, and part of this is the Eagles 49ers rivalry that has developed over the years, and the fact that both quarterbacks, Hurts and Purdy, are success stories outside the first round. I do think Eagles fans think that Brock Purdy is a little bit of a joke. But I think that's because 2 years ago, his story overshadowed Jalen Hurts' story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Went to the Super Bowl, lost it just like Jalen Hurts did, came out of nowhere. Now he's got the big contract. But I mean, the numbers, if you're going to be fair, the numbers say he's been just as good as anybody else in the upper right quadrant for the last 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, listen, he doesn't have all the skill sets that you look for in an elite quarterback, but his decision-making and football IQ is among the best in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, he's really a perfect fit for what they do offensively too, which is why he, immediately took over that offense and it changed.
Yep. 100%.
All right. Last chart you wanted to talk about was the mobility matrix chart, right?
Yeah. It just shows like if they stayed or moved. And so, and again, it's over 50% of the quarterbacks stayed in the same quadrant, but movement was common and usually tied to, when a quarterback changes teams, offensive scheme shifts, injury status, supporting cast problems, or, benefits, we get a better supporting cast, or natural development or natural regression. And so that's kind of where we're at with that. I think it's did you see a visualization of where people moved from 2023 to 2024 to or 2022, 2023, 2024. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. All right. So let's bring it back. All right. Let's go back to the root of the question as we wrap this thing up for the first question. What do you make of the question is, what's the best metric that measures quarterback? So you brought out 2. You feel like the expected points per drop back comparatively to completion percentage over expectation is the best thing to use, but you also acknowledge at the time, like, everybody's got a different offensive line. Everybody's got a different set of weapons. So it's hard to answer this question, which is why it's such a good question. And the point about Peyton Manning is true. He was a great quarterback, but Bill Polian, the GM, did a fantastic job also of surrounding him with really good wide receivers, really good tight ends, really good offensive line, Edgerrin James, Joseph Adai, Reggie Wayne. You can go through the list, but also some of that was those guys were able to flourish because Peyton Manning was throwing them the football as opposed to replacement quarterback.
Right. And I think that's why even with these metrics, which I think are some of the better metrics that are offered, you still need to look at it from what do they have, what do other quarterbacks have, and you never truly get away from that context and that qualitative part of this process. And I think especially with the quarterback position, it's essential to do that. And that's why I wish there was a unicorn stat that we could just pull and say this is the best quarterback because they got a 6.3 on the quarterback scale, but we don't have that, unfortunately.
I would call that the peak Aaron Rodgers stat, because I've always felt that at his best, Aaron Rodgers, we're talking about maybe Aaron Rodgers 2012 to 2016, was the greatest template quarterback play that I've ever seen in my life. I didn't see Johnny Unitas. I didn't clearly see, I'm trying to think. My football quarterback starts with Joe Montana. That's when I, got into football and caught the tail end of Marino's career. But I would say that the single most, and I'm not trying to diss Brady, because I'm kind of adding like physical things that you can do physically, athletically, that others can't, along with being a great thrower of the football. And Aaron Rodgers to me is the greatest single season or small season stretch template 4 or 5 year quarterback play that my eyes have ever seen.
And the crazy part is his footwork got worse almost every year in that stretch. And
yeah,
he still was
making make those off. Yeah, he was
making it literally didn't matter. One of the most physically gifted quarterbacks ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you would probably make a good argument that the footwork getting worse was not necessarily laziness, but just an understanding of what he was able to do off platform to be able to be like, okay, I can kind of throw while I'm half getting sacked, or you know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't so important to have the feet set because he could make any throw anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, it was another level for sure.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller makes sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
The next question is almost along the same line, and I love it. I love that we have these back-to-back questions because I think this one could be more data-driven and maybe less contextual than the quarterback position, right? The question is from Jeremy D, and he says, what analytics or metrics are most important when you're evaluating the edge spot? Now, you've written this, and I'll agree with you. I'll throw it in there. That there is context that certainly matters. If you have a great secondary behind you that gives you extra time to get to the quarterback, that's your sacks are going to be up, your win rate might be up, and things like that. So yes, context does matter, but I think in comparison to quarterbacks, probably less so 100%. As far as context, right? So what do you use, Sam, when you're really trying to evaluate? What are the best analytics to evaluate edge rusher?
So first off, I want to say at this moment, I have not found one. There's no good statistic for run defense. There's just no good way to say without watching and charting and, there's just no good. There's stops. Like stops is a pretty good stat for that. And I like that one, but it doesn't say the whole picture because, a stop could also be a sack. There's no way to really differentiate. So I will just say that up front. But I really like the following stats, and I think you have to put thresholds, and you'll see why in the next question why you need thresholds. But basically, I like relative pressure statistics, and that's the one where I do the snaps per pressure or more common pressures per snap. And I think that just gives a good indication of where they are if you're comparatively to other players. Win rate, I like a lot. Again, needs to be thresholded. You can't just have one play. It needs to have a decent amount. Usually, at least with PFF, you like to do the 50% of the max snaps. That's the threshold you typically do, unless there's an outlier. I like the NFL Next Gen time to pressure, get off, and those are pretty good stats. I think you have to look at all of them together. But I think when you look at those stats, it gives a good picture of how they are as a pass rusher, which is an important job for an edge. But at the same time, run defense and setting the edge and how they do, there's just no good way to capture it currently with what we have.
I do like the get off and the time to pressure snaps, because to me, those are the least contextualized stats. It doesn't matter about, because it's not about the quarterback holding onto the ball and you getting, it's just how fast your path was from where you aligned at the snap to where you were at the quarterback. So I think that shows you your athleticism, shows your speed, or if you're not a speed and athleticism guy, but you have a short time, you may have great hand usage, great technique. The bottom line is it's something that you did really well that makes you a good player at that position.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Awesome. Last question, unless there was anything else you wanted to. Oh, I did want to ask you, what is the difference between get off and time to pressure and how they're measured?
Yeah. So get off is just how fast they, get from their position to, to there. And the time to pressure is just how long does it take to get a pressure. So
right.
Get off is
you can measure a get off for a lineman, even if there's not a pressure stat. Like they may not have gotten a pressure.
Yeah.
So it's really just snap. And those times are they generally like fractions of a second or?
Yeah. I can pull up an example real quick just to help people understand it from NFL Pro.
Because I think when you're just thinking of a fan, like what's the difference between, the time you get off the ball and the time you're creating a pressure?
No, it's fair. It's a fair question. Let's go to defense and we'll go to pass rush.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give an Eagles example. So just give me 1 sec.
Look at you. Smart way to play to the audience, Sam Finkel. Didn't want to go Max Crosby. Didn't want to go Aiden Hutchinson. You wanted to take it straight to the Eagles. I like that.
Let's do Milton Williams and Moro Jomo, for example.
Oh, look at even more. There you go.
So Milton Williams, and this is just the regular season, his time to pressure was 3.09 and his get off was 1.08.
Nice.
Moro Jomo, his time to pressure was 2.97 and his get off was 0.98.
So his get off and time to pressure was actually lower than Milton Williams. That's pretty interesting.
It is,
because in our last mailbag, when we compared them to athletically, Milton Williams was the better athlete. But again, that's not always like I was saying with technique and leverage and hand usage. It's not always about athleticism, although get off tends to be about that. But you don't have to be the greatest athlete to even have the best get off. You just have to. So for example, and we'll end it up here. Some people are really good at timing the snap, right? We've seen like guys line up right on the line of scrimmage and almost look like they're offsides because they're timing the snap. That would count as part of their get off. So there's a mental element of the game as well.
Yeah. And I just looked at the official definition. It's just the get off is just to them crossing the line of scrimmage. From so just to be more clear, that's what that is.
Got it. All right. Another question here. What is your thought on the influence of analytics in sports? This is from David D. Can you make the data say whatever you want to say?
I love this question. This is a good question. It's like we don't really get too many like philosophical questions, but I kind of get at least the first part of this question which is fun. So I get to speak a little bit about the proliferation of data in sports, which is just, I don't get to do that very often. So I appreciate the question. So analytics have become, or becoming either way, a fundamental part of decision-making in sports. They are omnipresent, basically every sport that you can think of, the major ones especially. I think there will be a tension between the eye test, gut reaction and analytics. That always has been a thing. I think that always happens. I think the best organizations and decision makers, whether it be in sports or business, really any facet of life, take a dual approach, right? So numbers in a vacuum cannot fully capture a picture, but without numbers, it is hard to make informed decisions. Analytics are important tools, but remember, they're just tools. And even tools can be, fallible because of human error, biases, and other potential issues. So like just because numbers say something doesn't mean how you use a number would always be accurate.
Right.
And again, your gut and the eye test, does it look right? Does it smell right? Does it feel right? That's still an important part of decision making. So that's how I'd answer the first part of the question.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. Well, actually, answer the second part now because that's important too. The second part is can you make the data say whatever you want? Which I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
So in a vacuum, numbers are numbers, right? You can't really change objective metrics. You can make up your own metrics, and then you can make data say whatever you want, but you lose all credibility.
Right.
However, presentation of data can, and usually it is, right, either correctly or incorrectly used to make arguments, claims, decisions. And that is how, like, a narrative, you can make data say what you want comes from, right? So you can use data deceptively. I think I'll give you some real examples, right? Here's a claim that I could make as, from my position. Jalen Hurts is amongst the worst defenders in the league because he has allowed 100% completion when targeted. But when you look at that stat, he only allowed one reception. He was targeted once, allowed one reception during the entire regular and postseason, and it was for 0 yards. So you lose credibility immediately when you look at where that stat came from. Right. But let me give you a counterclaim to that, right? Jalen Hurts is the best pass coverage edge in the NFL. Out of all edges that were targeted, he allowed 0.0 yards, which was among the best. But again, he was only targeted once in coverage, and and sample size matters. There's no thresholds there. There's no sample size. Now, these examples I just gave you are hyperbolic. They're silly examples. They're exaggerated. But they prove a point, especially when it's more complicated stats and analysis are in play, right? I mean, you can see how someone can make those claims, and without actually going back and doing the research and seeing where those stats came from, you can make misleading characterizations of the stats, and it can be deceiving.
Yep.
That is why I think for us, especially, like, we take pride in having integrity in this process and trying to give as much background. What do the stats mean? Where do they come from? What variables were used in them? So you, as a listener, can draw your own conclusion and make your own projections. And, we'll give our opinions, but our opinions are based on a bunch of different data. It's not just like one metric. And that's kind of that big theme that I was talking about for these questions. It's important to look at the whole picture and make sure you can use multiple data sets to back up your claims.
Yeah.
You can't make stats say whatever you want, but they can definitely be used deceptively. That's
absolutely. And every single that was a really good description, Sam. I'm glad you even added like a really good picture for people to understand how they can be manipulated. I have seen it done quite a bit. I'm sure you have. Almost every coach or NFL personnel person I've spoken to, they have agreed with your number one assessment about just the importance of analytics and the proliferation of it in sports and the advantages of having information at your fingertips that maybe 30 years ago we didn't have so quickly. But at the same time, they've always said, like you said, it's a tool and you don't want to over exaggerate what something means. I'll give you just an example without using a name. Is if a lineman has a bad pass rush win rate, right? 1 year. And then the next year it's moderately better. Okay. You can trick yourself into saying, oh, well, that means the year after that and year after he's going to get better and he's going to be an all-pro. No, not everything happens in a linear fashion, right?
For
and
sure.
then you have to play different players, different schedule and all that, injuries, things of that nature. So
especially how they got that win rate, right? Like
of course.
If they are next to Jalen Carter, for instance, and they came from a different team, like there are other reasons why I agree with you.
Yep. I'll close it with, I was listening to, I think this best illustrates the difficulty with analytics and feelings, right? I was listening to WIP Morning Show the other day, and they were talking about Jalen Hurts and where is he the best, top 5, whatever. I guess Chris Sims came out with a ranking, and it was like Hurts was 10th, and people were upset. And somebody called in to the show with all this data, right? That showed like Patrick Mahomes' completion percentage, Patrick Mahomes' quarterback rating, Patrick Mahomes' yards per game, or something like win-loss, all these data elements about Patrick Mahomes. And then he went through Jalen Hurts', and they were all very similar, right? Similar completion percentage, similar expectation, similar this, that, and the other. And while I'm listening to it, the one thing I'm thinking in my own head, and then I went back and looked, is how many more times does Patrick Mahomes throw the ball per game than Jalen Hurts? Which again, that is an emotionless statement. I'm not trying to say Jalen Hurts is better or worse, or I'm just saying it makes it an unfair comparison because how do you know that Jalen's numbers would look that way if you added 10 throws? It amounts to 10 throws a game more per game, because it was like 170 passes more than Hurts. Well, we've seen examples of the Eagles try to pass the ball more and not always do well with it. And then also, why would you do that if you have Saquon Barkley, which again makes this not a pro or anti Jalen. There's just a different way of going about it. But I thought the way that the caller presented it just showed only looking at it, using the data and metrics to justify an argument, as opposed to looking at the bigger context of the discussion.
Sure. And I would just say on that, like, I find those quarterback, who's the top quarterback, silly, because you can win a Super Bowl with a top 10 quarterback regardless of where he falls on that list.
Right.
You could probably do it with a top 16 guy.
Sure. Joe Flacco was a Super Bowl MVP, won a quarterback. I don't think he was ever. Yeah. Right.
No,
well, it's almost like sometimes I wonder if that's like the same conversation with Hurts. Like Flacco was in the playoffs every single year from his rookie year to I think his 7th or 8th year when they won the Super Bowl. I mean, he had a great run. He would average 10 to 12 games. He played for a great organization with a great offensive line, a great draft and develop approach, and he played great in those big games. He really did. I mean, even before the Super Bowl, I remember I was at the game where they lost to the Patriots in Gillette in the AFC Championship game because Lee Evans dropped a Flacco pass in the back line of the end zone that would have been the go-ahead touchdown. So, like, it's a loss, right? But if you're at the game and you watch, he played great, but he was never top 5. In fact, we could have were Terry Bradshaw and Troy Aikman considered the best quarterbacks of their era? I don't think that they were. I don't know if they would consider them top 3, right? But they were champions and they won games, and they're definitely elite Hall of Fame quarterbacks.
Sure.
So I just think it's a great discussion. There's a lot more than stats and data that go into it.
I mean, it's fun, but at the end of the day, like, does it matter? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It only matters because fans, and I get it, I'm like this too with my teams, right? We're tribal. We want the recognition. We want our guys to always be considered the best. And that's what makes it kind of a fun discussion.
And you want to know how Jalen Hurts is the best? He just won the Super Bowl.
There you go. He just won the Super Bowl. And he's been to 2. So it's very impressive.
True.
I would definitely feel comfortable saying you couldn't just stick in 15 quarterbacks into that situation and say that they would do the same. So I give Jalen Hurts his props.
Yeah.
All right. Great stuff, Sam. We will do another mailbag in the coming days, and we'll do more in the coming weeks. So thank you very much. Really appreciate the time and the effort you put in. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching Inside the Data on Inside the Birds.